Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar that we host together with Neelix and Bluecrux. My name is Geert Willaert from Bluecrux, and I have a co-host, Marina Ketelslegers from Neelix. Today we will reflect on how leading companies bring finance and supply chain plans together to get quickly back in the driving seat rather than being caught by unexpected event. But maybe we'll first reflect on the current economic situation. As we all know, the COVID-19 did not only have an impact on our health systems, but we have seen major disruptions in demand and supply plans impacting our financial performance. As an example, we have manufacturing that had to close down their factories because they could not guarantee the health security measures. We had long lead time suppliers not being able to deliver because they are located in Asia. We had some customers that were able to produce but were not able to sell their products, for instance, to retailers. For example, IKEA closed their shops for many weeks. And all that has created enormous disruption. Other companies have seen growth in demand and had problems to deliver. Being able to respond to these disruptive events, making informed decisions is key to survive in this world of today. And it has become clear that making sound financial supply chain and financial planning decisions together is a key element to support these decisions. That has also been analyzed by Gartner. And what this graph is showing is the takeaways and the learning curve out of the previous financial crisis. Remember in 2008, 2009, 2010, almost 10 years ago. And what the graph shows is that for a certain industry, we have seen companies that have efficiently grown even in that financial crisis, and that other companies have shown average normal performance. When you analyze this study from Gartner, there are two remarkable points that struck our mind to say, why did these companies really have the opportunity to efficiently grow? What were the two major differences? Well, number one is, according to Gartner, is that these companies stepped away from silo plans in sales, marketing, finance, and supply chain, and started working with aligned plans across these departments. And finally, the second point is they didn't react to events that just came across. They started building scenarios, what-if scenarios already, to prepare for events in the future. And that shows the effect of trying to bring supply chain and finance in sync, that it is a key element to support your business and your growth. So that's what we will focus on today, give you some insights on how we can bring supply chain and finance in sync. But before we do that, let us introduce ourselves. We have two companies supporting this webinar, Bluecrux and Neelix. We are both Anaplan partner. And let's zoom in to Bluecrux first. So Bluecrux is a supply chain and operations professional company with about 100 people active in EMEA and in the US. We focus a lot on supply chain transformations, and we are very innovative in looking to digital supply chain planning. And we are, since 2.5 years, Anaplan partner. With this, I would like to hand over to my co-host, Marina, who will continue. I give the word to Marina.
Yes, thank you, Geert. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Marina Ketelslegers, and I'm a business consultant of Neelix. I'm happy to introduce my team to everybody on the call. Neelix is actually quite a young and agile company, and we are on a mission to unlock value of connected planning for FP&A teams, especially. We offer our clients, and mainly those are CFOs and FP&A leads, we offer a transformation from a sort of a flat FP&A to connected FP&A, which often includes going to the next level also in the software and systems. Like, for example, we also partner and we implement Anaplan. And I personally joined this company because of this mission. And I worked before for about 12 years in a very well-established corporate structure, and I've always been amazed, despite of all the resources which these kind of corporates would have, we would still be doing our planning, our financial planning, and I was in FP&A role and a little bit in supply chain as well. We would be doing that in Excel, and that would take then a lot of time and cause a lot of frustration. So Neelix is on the mission to change that, to show that can be done differently. Neelix has been founded by Ufinity, known brand of finance HR on the Belgian market, and Ina Meusen is our visionary leader. She's today also with us on this call. Kronos Group is our mother company, delivering IT services already for 30 years in Belgium. And our partnership with BlueCrux is about bringing together supply chain and FP&A expertise in connected planning, but also an expertise in Anaplan, because we're both certified model builders, and we have certified model builders, and we are both Anaplan partners. So we see that we will unlock more value for Anaplan customers that way, working together. And because you're on this call today, I would probably believe that you also recognize that there is more to find in this connection between finance and supply chain, and improve the collaboration in your organization as well. So together with BlueCrux, we are bringing actually about, today it's the first webinar. We are bringing two webinars. It's a series of 2 live webinars. And the first one, the part 1, is about challenges to connect finance and supply chain, and show how you actually connect financial plans and supply chain plans, with a little bit a sneak peek and preview of how it could look like in Anaplan. And part 2, and I hope that you all have already registered for part 2 as well. If not, you still can do it today. Part 2 is about a deep dive into different use cases, and specifically a showcase and Anaplan of connected finance and supply chain. And this connection between finance and supply chain is something what Anaplan offers intrinsically. It's sort of an intrinsically connected platform. We notice for our customers that quite often you have a lot of possibilities, of course, connect different plans within your organization, but the core lays quite often within finance, FP&A, and supply chain. And from there, you can scale to even more connected planning, of course, connected to sales, to HR, and the possibilities here are unlimited. Yeah. And now I will let Geert tell you more about what it actually takes to bring finance and supply chain in sync. So Geert, I will be sending over to you.
Thank you, Marina. So indeed, how do we now start in practice, and what are the building blocks we need to think of? How do you really enable your organization to integrate finance and supply chain planning? For illustrative purposes, we have taken integrated business planning, or financial S&OP, as a reference. But of course, it's not necessarily to have these processes fully up and running, because we know it takes quite an effort and a change management to drive your financial planning and supply chain integration. There are really also much smaller use cases and examples you can imagine to connect finance and supply chain. And I think when you reflect for yourself, most of you probably have a demand and supply plan in Excel or in a certain tool, and do have financial planning again in Excel or in your ERP. And you probably have quite some reconciliations to be doing on Excel, taking a lot of time into it. So why is that? I think number one is something I hope everybody recognizes is when you want to make informed decisions together, it looks like that even though we are the same company, even though we have the same culture, it looks like we are talking another language. Supply chain is talking about units, it's about pallets, it's about distribution centers. Our friends of operations talk about efficiency, waste, yield, capacities, while our finance friends talk about legal entities, tax optimization, intercompany pricing, transfer pricing, profit. So when you put these people together, it seems that they are not able to speak the same language. Number one, to try to deal with that is find a common language amongst each other and unite around one set of building blocks to start talking the common language. And the next slide tries to reflect on it. When you want to start having a common language, the main principle is do not try to find a solution that will hold everybody's detail. This is impossible because finally in every line of business that you are working on, you have specific things you want to treat. So the advice is to try to avoid this massive manual and hazardous reconciliation work between the details of each other. Our advice and what we have seen been working at our customers is that we try to get to an agreed aggregation level amongst each other where we talk the same language. I will give you the example of product families and product hierarchy. If you let everybody, let's say, agree on their specifics, sales want to have its own product hierarchy. Finance wants to have maybe a hierarchy from a brand perspective. And where do we have the biggest margin? Production, sales will want to have a product family where you can easily translate into capacities. Well, stop that discussion of having different hierarchies. Please go into an agreed, call it aggregation level, where we have the same product family and hierarchy to start off. And let everybody start from that and detail out to the needs that they have. That's a first example. A second example is when you look to the material flow through your company. So starting from the raw materials until the customer, sit together and agree on the right building blocks. For instance, we have the raw material inbound, we have the conversion in the production, maybe 1 or 2 conversions, then we store in a distribution center, we move the goods through a transport to another distribution center, and from there we potentially deliver the customer directly. These building blocks I am describing agree on the concept of the building blocks between operations, supply chain, and finance. So that, for instance, a cost center in finance will be able to set on a certain building block. If you later want to detail out that cost center, no problem, but stick to the building blocks. And that is the way to start building the elements, the basis to come to a common language. Of course, to do that, you will probably need one data set in one tool. We come to that later. Another element that you need to consider are your calendars. If you look internally, and you may reflect again on your own company, if you look to the different departments within your company, whether it's sales, whether it's logistics, if you have manufacturing activities, whether it's operations, if you have supply chain, the distribution plan and the financial plans, let's take the end of month. And when you look to actuals, and you will find out that in fact, in reality, every department looks at a moment in time to the actuals. Sales may want the actuals already because they will need to prepare the forecast for the next month. Production is not worrying. It can have its actual productions maybe 2 or 3 days later. Finance wants to have actuals and reconciliation and finding differences because they have a closing agenda to let's say, produce the figures after 2-3 days. Supply chain may again have other ways of looking to actual. So in your reality, when you go into a company, you see that, and with the example of actuals, but we can do that when you have the forecast ready, when the plans are ready, when other decision moments need to be done within a week or within a month. You will notice that these agendas are not synchronized amongst each other, or hardly synchronized. And that is another element that you can work on a very short notice, is take all your calendars and let's make one company calendar so that we can serve all the companies with the same data and deadlines. And then finally, once we have this building block of common language, once we have set the agendas at the same and the deadlines at the same moment, we can start moving into creating supply chain or demand supply scenarios with a financial impact. We see in too many cases that a lot of demand supply plans are made, but are not translated into financial impacts. And next to that, we see finance people being asked or chased by the CEO to get an insight on what the margins, the turnover, and the costs will do given certain glitches in demand or certain supply variabilities. So the goal is to have one scenario which will unite supply, demand, and finance. Of course, to do that, you will say that is not easy with my Excels or with my current legacy systems. To do that, you should enable your organization with the right tool, being one data, one plan, and with the database. And that's why Anaplan comes in with a very nice value proposition with the connected planning part. With this, I would like to hand over again to Marina to continue on some practical examples on how to do that. Please, Marina.
Thank you very much here. Thanks again. First, before we go into the practical examples, I just wanted to show to everybody this analogy, singing one planning song between finance and supply chain. I like this very much because it's so true. Both teams have their own part, but they have to stay aligned to be able to deliver efficient planning, singing this beautiful song together. So how about your teams? If we just open a poll now, and I would ask you, what would be the biggest value to unlock in connecting supply chain and financial planning for your organization? Now, Sean, could you please open the poll for everybody? So is it working?
Everybody should be able to see the poll now. Please let me know if you don't.
Okay, fantastic. So now everybody can see the poll. And I see that is in progress. That's great. So maybe I can also see the results. Okay. So Sean, would you be able to enable the results for me?
You should be able to see them.
Okay. So maybe then you can read them for me, because I don't see them.
Of course. So the top result was end-to-end financial scenarios, optimizing margin, which was the bottom option.
Okay.
The next top was align supply chain plans with finance plans.
Right.
The next one was
so those two.
aligning. Apologies, please carry on.
So the first two, I think it's actually showing that I think that we share the same, let's say, challenges, because when we see the biggest value to unlock, there might be where you basically maybe struggling today, and maybe you see the challenges of today in your organization. So let's maybe go ahead with our presentation, and I will tell you a little bit about the case study which we're going to talk about today. So we have also our case study company, which has been struggling to connect finance and supply chain, and we will now talk about which steps they took to basically solve those problems, and with some sneak peek preview in Anaplan, because this company also has implemented Anaplan. And for next webinar, we will focus on Anaplan model only, right? So we will basically going deeper into the model design and in the value which it can bring. Just from the showcase, you will see it. So if you want to join our next webinar, please do. So first step for this company was to align supply chain plans with financial budgeting and forecasting. And I'm sure a lot of you would agree from the poll results that it's actually where we definitely can unlock value for organizations. Why it is important? Well, because very often that's where the frustration is coming from. Now, when you as a supply chain analyst, for example, need to submit a final version to finance team for budget purposes, and you have not yet reviewed it, for example, with your own team, because you have a clash of calendars, clash of supply planning calendar and the budget calendar. So where to start here? I think the first would be just to put those supply chain and finance reporting calendars next to each other. I think it maybe sounds simple, but that's the first and most powerful step. And then try to align data collection sources and data collection steps, and then decision-making points. Because if you do that, that will already get you quite far. And let me show you the example how our case study company has done this in Anaplan. So I'm now switching to Anaplan, and you will see my screen. You will see how this looks like. So for this company, they have now one place where both supply chain and finance would be able to go and see what kind of planning events we have monthly, quarterly, yearly, what kind of events are still coming, what kind of planning events have been already completed and finished. And with a planning event, they would understand, for example, a meeting which has to take place, or a data submission moment, a data submission deadline, or maybe also an approval. So we'd have different formats of those events. So if you think about, for example, meeting, this can be a demand review or supply review meeting, or if you follow IBP process, which Geert was talking about, it's then integrated reconciliation, management business review. So all those steps are happening monthly, and then you have quarterly and also yearly steps to align with. So for the meeting, then you would be able then to send an email reminder to connect to Microsoft Teams, for example, for the meeting. We'll be able to complete it. And if it's, for example, an approval, then you just will be able to approve. And then if we're approving some data, it's sometimes handy just to go to this data to see what you're approving. And if you want to input some data, that's also where you go and input it directly from this calendar. So it's a really nice opportunity to align everybody, but also to see how the quality of the process is going. So are we delaying any tasks and how it's improving? So for example, looking at delayed completion. And if you want, you can change the frequency and some settings of the event also on one, and change the responsible person as well. So we will show more in the second webinar, but this just a general idea how it would look like. So when you have fixed all those foundations, for example, first with the calendar, then it's a great opportunity to look into something else, like, for example, improving returns on your CapEx investments. And that, surprisingly enough, you will see more and more opportunities with which connected planning is about to offer. Because, for example, normally in organizations, you have capital allocation or capex allocation process, which is then driven by finance. And then, and then also you have, for example, supply planning process, which is in the hands of supply chain. But if you look at connection between those two, we will see opportunities to improve returns. So if we just link our capital allocation projects to supply plan, and that's where you basically can begin. And link by link, I mean just link through the modeling of your data and link visually as well. Then we would be able to work with different scenarios to define financial impact, for example, of earlier or later launch date. So you have, for example, different assumptions or different factors to put into your scenarios. And that's where you will be able to play with them. Geert has mentioned already that we are now in the era of multiple scenario planning, so that we have to look at different scenarios, and always it's more than 2 or 3. So you can build a multiple scenario situation and choose the best returns for your portfolio, for example. Another step here would be also to think about what is the average, let's say, average CapEx project delivery time for my organization or for my industry. You also can benchmark that if you want. So knowing that, if it's, for example, 18 months, it means that you have to know 18 months beforehand, or your supply chain team would have to know that we need to start some projects so that we could deliver within 18 months. And this is on average, but it's a very powerful metric as well. So this company we're talking about, our use case or case study company, has done as well this work of connecting capital allocation to supply plan. And let me try to show you how it worked out. So we're here looking at the first question we have as a team finance, but also sales, of course, sales and finance and supply chain, is what is the gap between demand and supply plan. And we can look at consensus demand plan and plan production, and we see if we have a gap somewhere. We also can drill down into different, wow, okay. So just a second. So we can drill down into different products at different levels. For example, here I have a new product launch coming in January 2021. So I would like to know, is there any production plan for this new product? So I do see there is a difference here between demand and planned production. Basically, production is not yet planned. So we have to look into some solutions for that. And that will be a discussion and alignment point with supply chain. But what I also can do, I can see my full portfolio of CapEx projects, and I can compare some important metrics per project. So for example, I can look into my return on investment. I can see that what is going on here with different returns on investment situations. So what if I, for example, assign a different scenario to my first project? So if I do that, then I would be for sure better off with my returns. So I can look per project, but also within one project, I will be able to see within one project which scenarios I can have. And by changing different assumptions, I would look and compare which scenarios I have and which scenarios I would choose. So that helps me to move my portfolio returns from -3 to 7, just to know which scenarios I have. And now I hand over to Geert, who will be talking about working capital.
Yes, thank you, Marina. As already we all know, and certainly all the people in the call, is that working capital and inventory, they are two topics that are typically very hot on the agenda. And we see companies, let's say, not dealing with that in a connected way. We have a supply chain who will do its studies for versus service level and determine, let's say, the stock we want to have and the balance in stock we want to have to be able to service the customer. And okay, they will take some slack in it to be sure that we don't have stock outs. On the other hand, if you have too much slack in your inventory, you have the risk of overstock or waste. Whilst our finance colleagues, they need to finance the working capital, they have balance sheets to make, and they want to reduce at certain periods, certainly the working capital, which is on the balance sheet, and the finance needs for that. So this is typically, you would say, a struggle between the two departments. So how can you really make a first step forward in this way of working? The first easy step, although you could question, do I really need to do that in full detail, is to say, let's together, supply chain and finance and sales, let's together look to our customer portfolio and product portfolio on a true cost to serve base. So what do we really earn at this customer, and what products do really bring margin and contribution to our company? And even before talking about inventory, start reducing the cherry pickers who will just come when they need you and then will drop you when they have better offers at another point, and or products that bring low margin and take a lot of inventory, as an example. And then you need to sit together as a second step with the finance department from a supply chain perspective, and we just need to agree on two elements, and it will go hand in hand. Number one is to say, okay, if sales wants this service in the market and this is our market strategy, this would be, given the service level, this would be our inventory balance we need. Hence, this is the result on working capital. Vice versa, finance department will say, if we want to stay healthy on our balance sheet and to finance it, this would be the total amount in euros or that we can, as a company, we can bear on our balance sheet. Together, you make the plan on the inventory balance, and we will show that in a minute on how that works in Anaplan. And then the last step are the operational people. So once we have agreed, and that's what we see also too often, once we have agreed on inventory tactics, it is hard for the operational planner to take that every day into account, because the most systems they are using are only talking in units or volumes. So the let's say the small breakthrough you can achieve is that you will always show inventory units and euros and the total working capital that you generate with your new plan and with your new production orders and or supply purchase orders. Let's just have a look on how this works in Anaplan. So we are here in a connected model. We have here scenarios that we offer to supply chain to run safety stock analysis. And for the diehards in supply chain that are in the call, we see here the typical segmentation of ABC runners. Oops, I have the same problem as Marina. We were logged in too early into Anaplan, so just need to go back in. Just a second, please. That shows you how security in Anaplan works. If you are logged in and you do not act appropriately, you will be logged out automatically. So you see your runners, you see your coefficient of variation, and given a certain service level, taking the normal safety stock calculations and or specific calculations, you get a certain scenario of stock units and stock values. On the other hand, we have our finance people. They are looking into their ratios. The cash conversion cycle in this case, in this example, doesn't look too good. It's going up. It's 140 days. It's going to 169 days. And we see that the, let's say, the days of inventory are the ones that really kill our cash conversion cycle. So in this case, what we can do is we can simulate and make scenarios to say what would happen if we drop our service level with 95% for a certain. We know that we introduce risks stock out, but we will be changing the working capital need. And that is just a small example, and more to come on the next webinar on how you can together work on the same metrics and work through one data, one plan on achieving your goals in working capital. The last one is something which we have seen in the fall, which is on your mind, is understanding how to run financial end-to-end scenarios in a disruptive supply chain, which we have today. And here are the steps that we promote to be doing, and we will certainly zoom in on the 30th of June. We will show you how to run these scenarios, how to compare them, and use the metrics both from a supply chain, operational, and finance perspective to decide on which scenario is today most appropriate. The first thing that we advise to you is to look to your scenarios end to end. We see too many companies looking to scenarios just starting from the final stock to the customer. But in fact, you have to take it end to end. So if you're more into a distribution environment, you should look from your suppliers over the inbound stock to, let's say, your DCs, to the outbound to your customers. When you're in a manufacturing environment, as already explained, you should start from the landed raw material cost until the sales price that you have at the customer, taking into account the different rebates and commercial discounts you give, and the rolled up costs in the supply chain, but mainly from a variable standpoint of view. Then secondly, you need to set up your what-if scenarios both from a demand, supply, and inventory. Just as we saw, we have inventory scenarios based on service levels as an example, but you also have demand scenarios saying, okay, what happens if my demand would drop suddenly with 30% in France? You have your supply variability. What happens if I need to have my output of my factory is dropping with 20%? That is, let's say, the switchboard that you need to set up to be able to run and hence see the impact on margins and contribution and costs. And then finally, you can then run the different scenarios and compare them. Now, scenario management, as already explained, today many companies are happy if they can run 1 or 2 scenarios per month. With the current technology approaches, connected planning and Anaplan, we are talking about running scenarios every 10 minutes. So this gets you into a new shift of paradigm to say, why should I try with my teams to run just 1 or 2 scenarios? Why, and please think about that, is why don't we let the machine and Anaplan just run 100 or 1,000 scenarios with probabilities? And why don't we ask to Anaplan, what do you think today is the best scenario? So that you can then from there on start taking informed decisions. More to come on that in the 30th of June session. So this brings us to the end of our webinar. So again, we would want to thank you for joining us. If you want, you can at this moment in time in the chat start pulling in your questions. We will respond to every question offline, and we will take 1 or 2 questions right now. But before we do that, just remember what the key takeaways are that we have been highlighting on. It seems like a big chunk of work to align finance and supply chain plans, but in fact, you can start very small. The first thing I think Marina talked about is sit together and just align your calendars and make them constantly available for both teams. The second thing is, okay, work on this one data set. Agree on the common components and agree what you detail out in finance and what you detail out in supply chain. And also start working on CapEx project scenarios to improve the return of that portfolio. The third one, we talked about how to align working capital metrics between each other. And then the final goal is to run the end-to-end scenarios, evaluating the financial impact for every supply chain decision. These 4 elements we will again touch on the next time. So finally, we welcome some of the questions. You can ask them now, you can ask them offline, and we will answer to all of them. I see one question popping up about the end-to-end scenario management, which is, do you take typically fixed costs into account in scenario management? So there's 2 answers to that one. Normally in the financial end-to-end scenario management, on the shorter term, you will take your assets as a given. And so you will optimize more on variable costs and contribution. Unless, for instance, you say, due to COVID, my factory will only run at 50%. So hence, the ratio of fixed cost is extremely different than if I run it at 80 or 85%. I'm not sure, Marina, if you want to take one of the questions.
Yeah, sure, Geert. I think we have another question. I would take, it's, somebody is asking, we have a yearly budget where we collect all the inputs, and we also have monthly process to create a supply plan for next months going forward. How do I align those 2 processes between finance and supply chain? And I think it's a very good question. I think in many organizations, you would see that budget is a yearly process where everybody's kind of starting collecting the inputs, but there are some other processes which are going on monthly, maybe quarterly as well. And the key here is to, for example, if you use rolling forecast for your financial plan, if you do it, for example, monthly and think about the horizon of 18 months rolling going forward, then if your budget process starts, for example, I think the earliest can be the 6 months before you actually start the financial year, then you would be already ready with one version which you can use as a starting point based on your rolling forecast, and you could turn it into budget, with making this budget process almost a non-event. Of course, for budget, you sometimes review some assumptions in a more detailed way, financial assumptions, but also assumptions coming from other departments. You set targets, you redefine your organization, you align to strategy, but you can make this an easier and more meaningful process if you just use, for example, rolling forecast and planning horizon for your supply plan for 18 months going forward. So that would be my answer. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Marina. This brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you again, and stay tuned for the 30th of June, where we will show this in practice. Have a nice day, and see you on the 30th of June.